Okay guys, in this lesson we are going to learn how to multiply and divide fractions. It is mainly going to be a review of what you learned back in 5th grade, maybe a couple of new things. Okay, so here we go, we're going to get started. Alright. Okay, the first thing I kind of want to review is improper fraction to mixed number, how to do that. So if you happen to have an improper fraction of, let's say, 38 over 5, what we need to do there is this fraction bar here actually means divided by. So what you're going to do is just do a long division. 38 divided by 5. 5 goes into 38 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. I'm going to subtract. I will get 3. And so my answer is going to be 7 3/5. So that shouldn't be new. You should have learned that back in 5th grade. Okay? So that is improper fraction to mixed number. So we have the steps listed here for us. You're going to divide. Your remainder becomes your numerator. Your denominator stays the same. Okay? The next one is if you have a mixed number, how to turn that into an improper fraction. Well, if I have 4 2/3 and I need to turn that into an improper fraction, what I'm going to do is take my denominator and I'm going to multiply that by my whole number, and then I'm going to add my numerator. So 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. I keep my denominator for an answer of 14/3. So our steps there were to multiply your denominator and your whole number, add your numerator, and your denominator stays the same. So these are steps that you're going to need to know how to do in order to multiply and divide fractions and mixed numbers. Okay, now I'm just kind of go over some of the procedures for multiplying fractions. Oh my goodness, Eccles, you can't even spell today. Multiplying. This is why I teach math and not English. Ha ha ha. Multiplying fractions. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is fraction by fraction. Okay, so if I'm going to multiply a fraction by fraction, what I mean by that is there's no mixed number, there's no whole number. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3/4 times 2/5. Okay, so what you do here, the process is pretty simple. You would multiply your numerators and then you would multiply your denominators. Okay, so 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, then your last step would be to reduce. Well, I know that 6 and 20 are both even numbers. What I should actually do is find the greatest common factor. If I can't reduce this easily in order to reduce this, I can reduce this one pretty easily by using 2, dividing by 2/2, which you should know is the identity property. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 20 divided by 2 is 10 for a final answer of 3/10. Okay? Now, I would like to point something out if you're not familiar with this or to ring a bell for you. So I'm going to switch to green here and I'm going to do the same problem. 3/4 times 2/5. Now, if you have a problem like this, what you should do to save yourself a little work and a little extra time is look to see, can you cross simplify anywhere before you multiply. If you can cross simplify, that'll save you some work on the back end. And if I look at this problem, I can see that 4 and 2 can be cross simplified. So I can say 2 goes into 2 one time, 2 goes into 4 2 times. Now I can multiply. 3 times 1 is 3, 2 times 5 is 10. It saved me that reducing step. Okay, so you should look at that cross simplification. Cross simplify. And that will save you a step later on. Okay, so that was fraction by fraction. Okay, so now let's look at fraction times whole number. Okay, so this process is very similar. It just has one thing you need to keep in mind. when you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number, what you have to do is be sure to put your whole number over 1. Okay, that turns it into a fraction. So, for example, if I have 2/3 times 6, I'm going to rewrite that as 2/3 times 6 over 1. Okay, now I'm going to look and say, oh, I can cross simplify here. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 6 twice. 2 times 2 is 4, 1 times 1 is 1. My answer is 4. Okay, so that is fraction by whole number. Okay, my next one that I want to talk about is multiplying mixed numbers. Okay, so when we multiply mixed numbers, what we have to do is turn them into improper fractions. So I'm going to say 2 2/3 times 1 1/2. Okay, we're going to get complicated right away here. So let's take 2 2/3 and turn it into an improper fraction. So 3 times 2 is 6 plus 2 is 8, so that becomes 8/3. Times 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. That becomes 3/2. Well, if you look, 3 goes into 3 ones, 3 goes into 3 ones. Those 3's cancel each other out. When I cross simplify, I end up with 8/2. Remember that line means divided by. So I'm going to take 8 and I'm going to divide it by 2. 2 goes into 8 4 times. Oh, looky there. The answer is 4. Okay? So that is how we would multiply mixed numbers. So now you've seen an example of multiplying fraction by fraction, a fraction by a whole number, and multiplying to mixed numbers. Okay? So the next thing I want to talk to you about is what we call scaling fractions. Okay? And this will help you with not only multiplying fractions, but dividing them, because you'll come to see that the process for dividing fractions, you're actually going to end up multiplying. So this is going to help you develop some number sense, okay? And there's a slide on the Google slideshow about scaling fractions. And when we talk about scaling, what we're asking you is to think about the answer and what should it be, okay? You're thinking about, is this going to be reasonable? Okay, is my answer reasonable? And what we're asking you to develop is what we call number sense. Okay, so scaling fractions is going to help you develop that number sense. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide and we're going to talk a little bit about scaling fractions and number sense and what does that mean when it comes to fractions. So there are 3 things to remember. 3 things. Number 1, when you multiply by a fraction that is less than 1, okay? So I'm talking about like, an example would be like 1/2, 1/3, 2/3, 3/4, okay? Less than 1. What you need to know is your answer is going to get smaller. Okay? So, if I have 5 and I multiply that by 1/3, that's going to look like this. 5/1 times 1/3 is going to be 5/3, right? Because 5 times 1 is 5. 1 times 3 is 3. If I take 5 and I divide it by 3, I'm going to get 1 2/3 for my answer. 1 2/3 is definitely less than 5, right? So when I multiply a number by a fraction less than 0, that number is going to get smaller. Okay. When I multiply a number by a fraction less than 1, the answer will always get smaller. So before you even solve the problem, you should be looking at that and you should be able to see, oh yeah, I'm going to end up with a number smaller than what I'm starting with here. Okay? Okay, the second thing I want to go over when we are talking about scaling fractions is multiplying by a fraction equal to 1. Okay, so what happens when you multiply by 1? The answer stays the same, right? 7 times 1 is 7. 100 times 1 is 100, okay? 2 million times 1 is 2 million, okay? So when we're talking about fractions equal to 1, we're talking about 1. We're talking about 3 over 3. We're talking about 9 over 9, 2 over 2, 50 over 50. You get it, right? Any number over itself is equal to 1, okay? So whenever we multiply by a fraction equal to 1, answer stays the same value, okay? Now, the answer might look a little different, but the value would be the same. For example, 9 times 1 is 9, okay? But 9 times 2 over 2 is going to be 9 over 1 times 2 over 2 is going to end up being 18 over 2, right? When I simplify that, though, I will get 9. So you might look like it's not 9, but when you simplify, you will get 9, okay? So multiplying by a fraction equal to 1, your answer stays the same. So before you even do any work, you should be looking at that fraction and you should be saying, is this equal to 1? Oh, it is. My answer is going to have the same value. Okay, last, if you multiply by a fraction greater than 1, what do you think happens? Your answer will get larger, okay, than what you started with. So, and when we say fractions greater than 1, we're talking improper fractions. So, it might be something like 3 over 2, okay? It could end up being 4.5, right? And then you have to turn it improper, okay? So that would end up being, 9 over 2. It could end up being 5 over 1, okay? Any fraction greater than 1, okay? So, for example, if I take 1/2 and I multiply that by, I'll say 6/4, I'm going to end up with 6 over 8, right? And then if I reduce that by dividing by 2 over 2, I'm going to end up with 3/4. 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Okay, so that is just some number sense when it comes to scaling fractions. So when you look, you should say, okay, 1/2 multiplied by 6/4. Oh, 6/4 is greater than 1. Therefore, my answer is going to end up being bigger than 1/2. Okay, there's some number sense. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about here is dividing fractions. Okay, so we're going to start with dividing a fraction by a fraction. Okay, and I'm just going to do a couple examples of that. So 1/2 divided by 1/4. Okay, we're going to use a process called keep, change, flip here. Okay, keep, change, flip. It's very important though that you understand that flip is reciprocal. Spelled that wrong. It's great. Reciprocal, I think. Pretty sure. Don't quote me. Is the reciprocal. That means it's reciprocal the fraction. It's flipped the other way. Okay, and we would have already gone over that in class. So students, make sure you explain that to your parents. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my first fraction. I'm going to keep my 1/2. I'm going to change my division sign to multiplication. I'm going to flip my second fraction, which is called the reciprocal, 4/1. Okay, again, this is where the cross simplifying comes in that I explained earlier. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 4 twice. When I multiply across, I get 2/1 for a final answer of 2. Okay, so 1/2 divided by 1/4 is equal to 2. Okay. Now let's talk about fraction by whole number. Okay, so same thing here. Whole number has to be put over 1, just like when we multiply. So if I have 3/4 and I want to divide that by 2, I'm going to take 3/4 divided by 2 over 1. Again, I'm going to use keep, change, flip. Keep your first fraction, flip your sign to multiplication, change your sign to multiplication, flip your second fraction. So it looks like this. When I multiply across, 3 times 1 is 3, 4 times 2 is 8. My answer is 3/8. Okay. Next, I'm going to divide a fraction. Actually, I'm going to divide 2 mixed numbers. So I'm going to divide mixed numbers here. And when I divide mixed numbers, I need to turn them into improper fractions. So I'm going to take 3 1/2, and I'm going to divide that by 2 3/4. So the first thing I'm going to do is change both of my mixed numbers into improper fractions. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, so that becomes 7/2. I'm going to just rewrite my problem. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11, 11/4. So then I'm going to go through keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep 7 over 2. I'm going to change division to multiplication. I'm going to flip 11/4 to 4/11. Here's where I cross simplify. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 4 twice. Then I'm going to multiply across. 7 times 2 is 14. 1 times 11 is 11. Then I need to simplify 14 divided by 11. My answer will be 1 3/11. Okay. Okay, now I'm about to kind of blow your mind with something. So there is this new way, new to me, not new to mathematics because math doesn't really change, but that you can divide. And so if you're a kid that has trouble keeping track of all these steps, and when do I have to find a common denominator, when don't I have to find a common denominator kind of thing, you can find a common denominator and divide fractions. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of that. So if I have 3 1/4, and I want to divide it by 1/8. So I'm hoping you know that the common denominator here is 8. So when I'm gonna change this to improper first, since we're gonna have to do that anyway. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So this would be 13/4 divided by 1/8. So now I need to change 13/4 into 8s, and I'm going to do that by multiplying by 2 over 2, and I will get 26 over 8. So my new problem is 26 over 8 divided by 1/8. And when you have these denominators here are the same, all you do is divide your numerators. The denominators kind of just disappear. So then this becomes 26 divided by 1, which is equal to 26. Okay? Now, if you don't believe me that that's the right answer, 26, let's look at keep, change, flip. Okay? So if I did 26 over 8, keep, change, flip, these would cancel out, right? It would end up as 26 over 1, which is 26. So that is how you can find, you can divide with a least common denominator. Okay? I'll give you one more example of that. If I go 3/4, I want to divide that by 6. So this is actually going to be 3/4 divided by 6 over 1. Now I need my 6 over 1 to be in fourths. Well, all I'm going to do is come over here, and I need that to be in fourths. So I'm going to say, how do I get from 1 to 4? Well, I have to multiply by 4. If I multiply my denominator by 4, I have to multiply my numerator by 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Okay, so now I'm at 3/4 divided by 24 over 4. Okay, which is actually 3 divided by 24, which is this, 3 divided by 24. When I simplify, I have to divide by 3 over 3 here. I would get 1/8, right? Well, let's check that, okay? So I just showed you it was 1/8. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, so we had 3/4 divided by 24/4, okay? So if we keep, change, flip, we're going to cancel those out, right? 1, and it's going to end up with 3/24. If I divide by 3/3, I would get 1/8 for my answer. So it's the same thing. So that's another way you can divide fractions, is with your least common denominator, and you would just divide the numerators. So that's a new way I learned, a teaching strategy I learned last year, that I show students as another way that they can divide fractions. So I hope you learned how to multiply and divide fractions in this video. If you have any further questions, please contact your teachers. All right, thanks.